Here is your full script. She had done everything right. She had dressed carefully that morning, pressed her blouse until it was smooth, pinned her hair the way her mother taught her, and walked into that meeting room with her chin held up and her hands steady at her sides. And still, they laughed at her. Not loud laughing, not the kind that fills a room and bounces off the walls. It was the quiet kind, the polite, suffocating kind that rich men use when they want to remind you exactly where you stand without ever saying a word out loud. Clara Whitfield was 34 years old. She had spent the last 6 years building a small cattle operation from the ground up after her husband passed and left her with 40 acres, a broken fence line, 2 horses, and a little girl named May who still slept with the lamp on because the dark scared her. Clara had not asked anyone for help. She had figured it out herself. She had learned what she did not know, worked when she was tired, cried only after May was asleep, and slowly, quietly, turned those 40 acres into something worth being proud of. And now she needed a water rights agreement. Just a small extension of the creek access that ran along the southern edge of her property. Without it, her cattle would not survive another dry summer. So she had walked into the Harlan County Land and Water Association meeting, the only woman in the room, and she had presented her case the best she knew how. They had not even let her finish. If you are just finding this channel, you are in the right place. We tell slow, emotional stories about quiet love and second chances in the Old West. Take a breath, get comfortable, and stay with us until the very end, because this one is going to stay with you. The man who spoke first was Gerald Aldrin. He had a gold pocket watch, soft hands that had never touched a fence post, and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Mrs. Whitfield," he had said, drawing out her name like it was something slightly inconvenient. "We appreciate your coming in. We truly do. But surely you understand that water access agreements of this nature require considerable collateral." The other men had shifted in their chairs. Some of them looked at the table. One of them stifled something that might have been a laugh. "I have 40 acres, Clara said. "Healthy stock, a solid operation." Of course, Gerald waved a hand. "But you must understand that a woman operating alone, without a husband to co-sign, without the kind of established history that lending institutions rely on—" "My history speaks for itself," Clara said quietly. 6 years of payments, not one missed." "Yes, well." He folded his hands. "We will take it under advisement." They did not take it under advisement. She could see it in the way they avoided looking at her when she stood to leave. She could feel it in the heaviness of the door closing behind her. She sat in her wagon for a long time before she picked up the reins. She had a daughter who needed her. That was the only thought that got the horses moving. What Clara did not know, as she drove home through the August dust with her jaw set and her eyes dry, was that a man named Holt Calloway had been standing outside that meeting hall window. He had not been eavesdropping exactly. He had been waiting. He had come to discuss his own land matter, an old grazing permit that needed renewal, and he had arrived early the way men who live alone tend to arrive everywhere, quiet and unhurried. He had heard enough. Holt was not the kind of man who talked much. His nearest neighbor described him as steady, which in that county meant reliable and private, and not particularly interested in other people's opinions. He had run the Calloway Ranch for 12 years since his father passed, and in those 12 years he had not attended a single social gathering, not planted flowers, not painted the porch, and had eaten most of his meals standing over the kitchen sink looking out at the ridge. His ranch shared a border with Clara Whitfield's land. He had watched her operation from a distance for years, not in any way that was improper, just the way a neighbor watches. He had noticed when she replaced the fence posts that first winter. He had noticed when she added a second water trough along the east pasture. He had noticed her daughter, May, riding the smaller horse in tight circles in the yard and laughing so hard it carried across the open land. He had never spoken more than 12 words to Clara Whitfield at any one time, but he had heard what they said to her in that room, and something in him went very still. He did not go inside for his own permit that day. He turned around, walked back to his horse, and rode home thinking. Clara spent that evening fixing a loose board on the barn door and listening to May talk about the frog she had found near the creek. It was the best part of every day, listening to May talk. The girl had her father's way of turning everything into a story worth telling. "Mama," May said from her perch on the fence post. "What happened in town?" Clara glanced up. "Grown-up business, baby." "Did it go bad?" Clara considered lying. She had gotten better at it over the years, the kind of lying that was just protection, just keeping the worry off a 9-year-old's shoulders for one more day. But May was watching her with those serious dark eyes that saw right through most things. "Not yet," Clara said, and went back to the board. The next morning, there was a man on her property. She saw him from the kitchen window before first light, a figure moving along the creek line with a slow and deliberate walk. Her hand went to the rifle on the hook by the back door before she recognized the horse tethered near her fence. Holt Calloway. She pulled her coat on and went out. He stopped when he heard her coming. He held his hat in both hands the way men do when they are trying to look less threatening, and he looked at her with a directness that was not rude, just honest. "Morning," he said. "Mr. Calloway." She stopped a few feet away. "That's my fence line." "Yes, ma'am, I know it." He did not move. "I heard what they said to you yesterday." Silence. The creek moved quietly beside them. A bird called once from the cottonwoods along the bank. "I don't need sympathy," she said. "I know that too." He looked at the water. "I have a water rights agreement, full creek access, both banks, filed through the county in 1887. My name's on it." He paused. "Your southern pasture shares this creek, and my agreement covers this stretch." Clara watched him. "What I'm saying," he continued, still looking at the water, "is that I could extend access to a neighboring operation under a shared stewardship clause. It's legal, it's established, and it doesn't require Gerald Aldrin's signature or his approval." She stared at him for a long moment. "Why would you do that?" He finally looked at her. He had gray eyes, patient, and still the way winter water is still. "Because what they did was wrong," he said simply. She did not say yes right away. She thanked him, told him she would think on it, and walked back to the house to start breakfast for May. She thought about it for 3 days. On the 4th day, she rode over to the Calloway Ranch. It was the first time she had been close enough to see it properly. The house was large and plain and needed paint. The yard was functional but cheerless. There was no garden, no curtains in the windows, nothing that said someone lived there who had chosen to be there, rather than just ended up there. Holt was in the barn. He heard her horse and came out wiping his hands on a cloth. "I'll accept the arrangement," she said. He nodded. "I'll draw up the paperwork." "I want it written clear," she said. "Equal terms. I'm not taking charity." "It's not charity," he said. "My cattle drink that water too. I want the creek maintained properly on both banks. You'll be doing me a service." She looked at him a moment longer, trying to find the angle. The thing he was getting out of this. She did not find one. "All right then," she said. That was how it began. It did not begin with warmth. It began with a legal document and a firm handshake, and 2 people who were each accustomed to doing everything alone, now sharing a fence line and a creek. But then the summer turned hotter than anyone expected. The grass along Clara's east pasture went brown by July. 3 of her cattle lost weight fast. May got a fever that lasted 5 days and scared Clara so deeply that she sat up the last 2 nights in the rocking chair beside the girl's bed, just listening to her breathe. On the 6th day, Holt appeared at her door with a pot of venison stew and a look on his face that said he had not planned to come but had come anyway. He did not stay long. He left the pot. He checked on the 2 horses he could see from the yard and mentioned quietly that the east trough had a slow leak he had noticed from across the fence, and if she wanted, he could patch it before sundown. She stood in the doorway and watched him walk toward the trough with his tools and did not say anything for a while. "She's better," Clara said finally. "May, the fever broke this morning." He stopped. His back was to her. He was quiet for a moment. "Good," he said, and kept walking. It was such a small word. Good. But something about the way he said it, not casually, not as a filler word, but carefully, like he meant it completely, made Clara have to look away toward the horizon for a moment before she trusted herself to go back inside. In August, Gerald Aldrin filed a nuisance complaint against Clara's operation. He cited the new shared stewardship arrangement as an unlicensed water modification and demanded a formal county review that could freeze her access for up to 60 days. 60 days in August without full water access meant losing at least a third of her stock. Clara got the notice on a Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, Holt was at her door before breakfast. He had already read the filing. He had already spoken to his attorney. "He's reaching," Holt said. "The shared stewardship clause is airtight. I've used it twice before on other parcels, and no one challenged it." "Gerald Aldrin has never had reason to challenge you before," Clara said. He looked at her steadily. "He's not challenging me now either. He's challenging you, and he's using my name to do it." Something tightened in her chest. "Holt, I don't want you getting pulled into my... Clara." It was the first time he had used her first name. He seemed to notice it at the same moment she did. He did not apologize for it. "I filed the original agreement. My name is already in it. This is not you pulling me in. This is my business as much as yours." She looked at him for a long time. "He won't stop," she said. "Men like Gerald don't stop until they get what they want or they get embarrassed into stopping." Holt was quiet for a moment. "I know what he wants," he said. "He's been trying to buy your southern pasture for 2 years. I know because he tried to buy mine first, and when I said no, he told me he'd get the water access rerouted anyway eventually." He paused. "He sees your operation as a gap in his expansion. That's all you are to him." "And what am I to you?" she said before she could stop herself. The question sat in the air between them. He looked at her without any of the awkwardness she expected. His expression was so open and straightforward that it almost embarrassed her for asking the question the way she had. A neighbor who deserved better than what she got in that room, he said, and someone who has been doing something hard and doing it well, alone, for a long time. May appeared in the kitchen doorway behind Clara in her nightgown with her hair loose. She looked at Holt with the frank appraisal of children. "Are you the man who fixed our trough?" May asked. "I am," Holt said. "Mama said you were quiet but not rude," May said. Clara closed her eyes briefly. "May." "That was a compliment," May said seriously, and disappeared back into the kitchen. Holt looked at Clara, and there was something in his face that might have been the beginning of a smile, though it stayed quiet. "I'll meet with the attorney tomorrow," he said. "We'll file a counter-response. But Clara, there's something else." He hesitated, and hesitation was not a thing she had seen from him before. "If we presented this as a formal operating partnership, it would strengthen the legal standing considerably. Gerald has no grounds to challenge a shared agreement between two adjacent landowners operating jointly." She understood what he was offering. It was practical, it was legal, it was not romantic, not the way he said it, steady and matter-of-fact, but it meant their names together on something permanent. "Let me think on it," she said. She thought about it standing at the stove that night. She thought about it watching May sleep. She thought about what it meant to say yes, and what it would mean for the land, and whether the thing quietly growing in her chest every time he drove up the road was something she could trust or something she was building out of loneliness and fear. She rode over the next morning and said yes. The counter-filing was submitted on a Friday. On the following Monday, Holt stood up at a public county land meeting and did something that Gerald Aldrin had not anticipated at all. He spoke, not at length. Holt Calloway was not a man of length. But he stood in front of 40 people and laid out, in plain language, exactly what the creek access situation was, exactly what rights Clara held under the shared stewardship clause. And then, in the same calm voice, he described the pattern he had watched for 3 years of Gerald Aldrin filing nuisance claims against small operators whenever he wanted their land, citing 4 specific instances with dates. The room was very quiet. Gerald Aldrin had soft hands and a gold watch, but he did not have 40 years of reputation in that county the way the Calloway name did. He did not have 12 years of quiet, reliable, honest dealings with every rancher in the room. He had underestimated who Clara Whitfield's neighbor was. The county water board dismissed the complaint 2 weeks later. Unanimously. Clara found out by letter on a Thursday afternoon. She sat at the kitchen table and read it twice. May was outside with the horses. The late light was long and golden through the window. When Holt rode up an hour later, she was sitting on the porch steps. She held up the letter when he got close enough. He dismounted slowly, took the letter, read it, and folded it back up. He stood there for a moment, not speaking. Then he sat down on the porch steps beside her, not close, but not far either, and looked out at the pasture. They sat that way for a while, not talking, the way two people sit when there is nothing left to prove and everything still left to say. "I don't know how to thank you," Clara said finally. "You don't need to." "Holt?" She turned to look at him. "You've been a good neighbor." He looked at her then. The light was going golden orange. His face was quiet in the way it always was, but his eyes were not distant anymore. "I'd like to be more than a neighbor," he said. "If that's something you'd consider." She was quiet for a moment, not because she was uncertain. She had stopped being uncertain somewhere around the 4th week of this summer, somewhere between the venison stew and the trough repair, and the moment he had stood in a county meeting room and said her name like it belonged to something worth defending. "May likes you," she said. "I like May," he said. "She'll have opinions about everything," Clara said. "She already does." "So do I," he said. "We'll get along fine." Clara looked back out at the land. Her land. The land she had held on to through grief and drought and loneliness and men in rooms with soft hands who thought she was a gap in their expansion. "Ask me proper then," she said quietly. He was quiet for a moment. Then, in that low, unhurried voice of his, he asked her. She said yes with the sun going down over her pasture and May's laughter coming from somewhere near the horses, bright as water. The wedding was small. Just the pastor, a neighbor woman who brought a cake, and May, who wore her good dress and stood very close to Holt the entire time and held his hand during the part where the rings were exchanged, positioning herself between them like she was part of the arrangement, which she absolutely was. When it was over and they were walking back to the wagons, May looked up at Holt with those serious dark eyes and said, "You're staying now, right? At our place?" "If that's all right with you," he said. May considered him for a full 3 seconds. Then she reached up and took his hand. "You can have the room with the good window," she said decisively. "Mama and I already talked about it. Clara caught Holt's eye over May's head, and the look on his face was something she knew she would carry for the rest of her life. Not the expression of a man who had gained a wife. The expression of a man who had just, unexpectedly, been given a home. There are women in this world who get told, in words and in silences, that they are too much and not enough all at once. Too difficult. Too alone. Too without the right name behind them or the right signature beside them. And they carry that weight so long and so quietly that they start to believe it themselves. But sometimes, the land has one more story to offer. And sometimes the quiet man at the fence line has been watching for longer than anyone knew, waiting not to rescue her, but to simply stand beside her where she already stood, and say without any ceremony at all, "I see what you built, and I see you." If this story touched something in you, we would love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us what part stayed with you the longest. Tell us where in the world you are watching from tonight. And if you would like more stories like this one, slow and warm and true to the heart, please subscribe and come back. There are more stories waiting, and every single one of them was made for you.